5 books and counting. The Tales from the Omni Vault continues to expand as a universe. Go ahead and check the links down in the description to get your copies today. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni Viewer, and we're back with Monarch. And I gotta say, after the last few episodes really didn't do it for me, I was a little concerned. I just couldn't shake the feeling that maybe with 2 subpar episodes in a row, one of them specifically really bad, I just felt like I'd done this before. Like, maybe this was the turning point and the series was going to take a downhill turn as it reached the conclusion. So I was pleasantly surprised when this most recent episode actually turned out to be good. Surprisingly good. I think partly because it focuses so much on the past era. A surprising amount of it, actually. Specifically, we finally learn how Lee Shaw has lived so long, which is that he hasn't necessarily lived that long. He was just part of the first official Monarch expedition into the Hollow Earth, and it didn't go so well because, well, I'll discuss the details on that a little bit later in the video. For now, I just want to say that the way it's handled, the way they do this whole deal with Shaw coming back, realizing 20 years have passed, and little hero's all grown up, and now that he's back, he's going to be just sort of locked away as Monarch's secret shame, that was very well done. There was some really good writing here. Perfect? Not necessarily, because I do think they kind of had to rush through it a little. Now, the actors gave great performances, and what they had to work with wasn't bad, but I do kind of feel like, due to some bad time management, the writing staff basically realized that they only had that scene between Shaw and Hero to explain why Shaw wound up where we first see him in 2015. So, I mean, that feels like it probably should have been a little bit longer. It wasn't necessarily like they were trying to speed through it, but in a bigger picture sense, it did feel kind of rushed. Ergo, maybe a little more time should have been devoted to that part as opposed to spending an episode that ultimately serves no purpose other than to explain where Apex comes from. But, you know, it is what it is now. Like I said, otherwise, the episode's really good. Shaw feels like he's back to his old self again, as opposed to the nigh-religious, fanatical villain he was portrayed in the last 2 episodes. Kate and May, well, Kate's not really in this episode that much. May is in it a bit more, and you know how she's been kind of standoffish and abrasive throughout nearly the whole series? Here, that's gone. And like I said, the past segments where we get to see the essential downfall of Monarch in general and Bill Randa specifically, that in particular felt like it was very well crafted. I guess it's because this episode was actually written by Matt Fraction, who's also one of the primary series developers. So he had the vision. He was one of 2 people with the vision at least, and he put a lot of effort into this one. This is a good way to get the series back on track after a couple of episodes that just didn't do as well. Now, as far as the explanation for what happened to Shaw, the characters basically have wound up in the Hollow Earth. That is, Lee, Kate, and May. They're all in the Hollow Earth, or at least somewhere in the Hollow Earth. We don't know exactly where. It clearly doesn't look like any place we've seen in the movies at this point, or even in the comics. If we've even seen... never mind. Anyway, we're down there, and Shaw explains that time moves differently down there, which is actually something they appear to have stolen or maybe borrowed from Edgar Rice Burroughs' Pellucidar novels. If you don't know, the Pellucidar series is basically Edgar Rice Burroughs' Hollow Earth series, but it's not just Journey to the Center of the Earth rehash. He goes to great lengths to make it a fully realized prehistoric fantasy world, but with a few really weird twists, most notable of which is that time doesn't seem to have any meaning in Pellucidar. In the first book, for example, the hero David goes off on this adventure that, to him at least, takes like weeks to complete, and when he gets back to his original companion, Dr. Petrie, who he finds Petrie in the exact same spot doing the exact same thing he was doing when David left, and Petrie looks at him and goes, "It's only been a couple minutes." So that's our first inkling. It's really hard to explain, and even in the books they say it's way too hard to explain, so just accept that time is warped here. But that seems to be the principle they're applying to the Hollow Earth, at least in Monarch. And of course, that is meant to explain how Shaw was able to disappear into the Hollow Earth in 1962, resurface in 1982 without having aged so much as a day, and thus has been around for so long and yet still seems not necessarily young, but younger than he ought to be given the amount of time he's been around. Now, maybe that's also meant to be an explanation for how the other Titans, specifically Godzilla, have been around for so long as well. Since they spend most of their time underground, they experience time at a different rate than on the surface, so maybe it's only been a couple of years for them, whereas it's been eons above ground. Maybe that's the intention, but you may recall, I did that video all about how we determine what's canon and what's not. So we have to ask ourselves, does this line up with the A canon, the movies? Because they are the authority on the matter. And in the movies, we haven't seen any indication that time moves differently underground. The rule seems to be as above, so below. There was no indication that time was moving faster as the submarine was exploring Godzilla City while King Ghidorah was wreaking havoc on the planet. There was no indication that while Kong was exploring the very center of the Earth, that years and years had passed above ground. It all seemed to be happening in real time. The only explanation I can think of that might reconcile this, and mind you at this point, it is only a guess, I don't know if it's actually certain, is that maybe this particular realm of the Hollow Earth is somewhere within that weird Stanley Kubrick light show that we see just before we reach the very center. You know, the one that was introduced in Godzilla vs. Kong. Considering that this area appears to be a bit more unusual, there doesn't seem to be any indication that we are right at the core, of course. It could be that's the case. The fact that the atmosphere and the coloring also seems so weird might also be an indicator of that. And since we still don't really have an explanation for what that is beyond an interesting visual, I mean, it's only a guess, like I said. I have no idea if the final episode is going to explain it any further. I have no idea if the new Empire is going to bother trying to explain it. But yeah, at this point, I am willing to call that another inconsistency in the timeline, which means maybe Legacy of Monsters isn't going to be as canon in the long term as other works. Other than that, we also get the surprise twist that Keiko is inexplicably still alive. When I say inexplicably, I mean that when we saw her take her great Disney villain fall into the pit of ravenous bugs, it seemed pretty clear those things were eating her as she was falling. So, Yeah, I'm not sure how they're going to explain the way she got past them. Then again, May fell into the Hollow Earth only like 2 seconds before the larger bug thing emerged, and somehow she avoided getting eaten, so who the heck knows? There are parts of this series that I don't think were clearly thought through before they were approved, and yeah, that is a bit of a problem when you look at it as a bigger picture thing, of course. But, you know, like I said, this episode specifically was a step up from what came before. And we're nearly at the end at this point. I hope that they're able to at least get to a satisfying ending. I'm gonna guess that if they want to end it on a cliffhanger, and given the way most streaming services do their original shows, I wouldn't be surprised if that is the case. My guess would be they're going to make actual use of the fact that time moves differently down there and have the Hollow Earth characters emerge like right after Godzilla defeats King Ghidorah in 2019. It's a guess. I can't really confirm it, but if I'm right, you heard it here first. Let's see if there's anything else I can talk about. You know what? Let's talk about Kentaro for a moment. Because even though this is yet another episode where Kentaro doesn't really do much, he actually does get some stuff to work with again. Kentaro, I usually forget about him whenever I'm doing these reviews, because the show usually forgets about him too. He's made overall, what, 3 major contributions to the plot that only he could do. He stuck to his guns and got everybody out of Alaska when the Frostvark was attacking. He used his artistic eye to interpret Hiroshi's map, and he brought Kate and the Monarch files to May, even though that isn't necessarily something only he could do. It's still a contribution. It's how May gets involved. But the rest of the time, it just feels like Kentaro's along for the ride, and the last couple episodes in particular, he was mostly complaining about how he doesn't want to be there anymore, but he's not just leaving. He's still tagging along for some reason, even though he's made it clear he doesn't actually want to tag along. And as a result, nothing's really happening to him with it. His character doesn't really go through much. Kate and May are having all the major plot developments happen to them, and he's just Ken. So this episode, I mean, again, he still isn't really doing that much, but he does get to have some emotional performances because he's the survivor, whereas the people he's grown closer to over these past few episodes, for all he knows, they're dead. And he has to live with that. And the actor gives a really good performance in those scenes. He even gets to finally confront Hiroshi about everything that's been going on. So, yeah. Nice to see Ken finally getting his dues again. I don't know if that's going to last to the final episode, or if it's going to change long term if the series does get a second season. Then again, improvement is improvement. I guess that's all to talk about for now. The finale is promising to have Godzilla fight the Ion Dragon, so hopefully that works out. The series has to deliver a good kaiju fight at the end, right? I mean, maybe it doesn't have to, but it should. Well, we'll see what happens. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off. Thank you all for watching. Now be sure to head down to the description to check us out on other platforms, as well as find links to the 5 current books in the Tales from the Omni Vault universe. Again, thank you all, and we'll see you next time.